Thank you.
That's perfectly fine. And if people need to eat or something, be my guest, all right. So you know me, as a photographer and a filmmaker and the curator of the India Project. And if you were at the very first Salon, then you might recall that I referenced my grandfather who was in vaudeville. And that has affected me quite deeply. And one of the ways it shows up in my life is through my being involved in Gilbert and Sullivan. So what I want to do today is give you a brief history of vaudeville and its antecedents, then a brief history of Yiddish theater, and then I'd like to talk about Jewish vaudeville and its descendants, and then talk about my grandfather. So several years ago, I gave a talk at our synagogue on Jewish photography. This seems to be a theme here with me. And one of the people that I quoted was Gary Winograd, who is one of the all-time great, street photographers, right? So one of the things that he said is, to be a great photographer, you must be Jewish, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. But it is interesting that a tremendous number of well-known, recognized photographers are Jewish. So why is that? And I think there's a real reason, and that's because built into the Jewish experience is a sense of exclusion, of removal, and also of observing. We observe a lot. We're not paranoid, we're perceptive. They really are chasing us. Right? So I also think that there are so many Jewish lawyers because not only are we the people of the book, but we're used to the Talmudic deconstruction of texts. It's the same MO in comedy. We observe as outsiders, we take things apart. We make social commentaries, and above all, we see the absurdity in all of it. It's an anxiety about being both in and out. Mel Brooks has a great line. He says, if they're laughing, how can they bludgeon you to death? And Saul Bellow characterized Jewish literature as laughter and trembling.
Ooh.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it really hits the mark. So let's talk about vaudeville. Where did it start? English music halls, medicine shows, circus, dime museums, minstrel shows, which I'm going to talk a lot about, the Chautauqua, the lecture circuit, variety acts, saloons, burlesque, and the constant theme, the unifying theme was constant surprise. And it really suited a rapidly changing America. And the parallel really is in Sesame Street. In the 60s and 70s, the nation was just really boiling over. Things were happening fast. Technology was taking over. And Sesame Street, very different than other children's shows, it mirrored that same energy and that same kind of freneticism. So vaudeville was doing the same thing. From 1881 to 1932, vaudeville was the heart of American show business. All the stars were well known. Vaudeville was an agent of assimilation and liberalization. The personnel and the material came for the ambitious underclass immigrants. It was the first major institution to provide an opportunity for advancement, regardless of race, class, sex, or religion. As long as you were funding, or you could throw a place or something, you were fine. In 1911, Flo Ziegfeld hired Burt Williams to star in his Follies. And we'll talk a lot about Burt Williams. The entire cast threatened to walk out. Burt Williams was Black. And Flo Ziegfeld said, go if you want to. I can replace every one of you except the man you want me to fire. And Ivan Karamazov from the Flying Karamazov Brothers, who were a big act in the 60s and 70s, I don't know if they're around anymore, has a wonderful quote. He says, to me, it seems like a kind of group therapy that the country went through. Suddenly the nation wasn't all white, Anglo-Saxon, and Protestant anymore. To us, the humor of the time seems racist, bigoted, and sexist. But I think that what was really happening was that they were processing it. And this is a quote from, this is my new neighbor, and he talks kind of like this. So instead of one powerful group laughing at one particular other group, it was all of us laughing at how different we all were. There are a lot of different explanations for where the term vaudeville comes from. The one that I like the best is voix de ville, from the French, meaning voice of the city. voice of the people, a folk form expressing the people's voice. So one of the resources that I have used is this phenomenal book, and I can put this in the chat or something, but it's called No Applause, Just Throw Money, the book that made vaudeville famous. It is by a man by the name of Trav SD. Travesty, right?
Oh.
So, it's really pretty funny. His real name is Travis Stewart, and he really did an unbelievable research job with this book. So I'll be quoting from that in several different places. All right, now I would like to share my screen. Let me get this going here. Second. Okay, so I am going to share the screen. Let's do this. And let's see if that works. Are you seeing the screen?
Yep.
All right, you seeing it now?
Yep.
Okay, so here we go. The first thing I really want to talk about is this.
Alan,
Right.
you might want to
Yes.
highlight one screen. They're showing the next screen as well.
Oh, that's not what I want. Okay, hold on one second. How about that?
Perfect.
Yes.
All right, great. Good, okay. This is the complications and delights of having two screens. So, okay, so minstrel shows. If you recall, a couple of years ago, Governor Northam from Virginia got caught with pictures of him in blackface that was used in his, I think, law school graduation book. It was a big scandal. And actually, I found out recently that he never resigned. He's still in office because his chief of staff was Black, and she convinced him, rather than just quit, he should use his power to do some good for the Black community, which he's done. And so with the backing of the Black community, he's still in power. So all of which is to say that everything is nuanced. There is nothing simple and straightforward. So vaudeville blackface minstrel shows started in the 1820s. And it was popular from the 1840s on. It was America's first national popular culture. It desensitized white audiences to the horrors of slavery. Black performers actually corked themselves to make them look blacker in order to get work. Is a poster for something that was done during the WPA, during the Depression. The Swanee Minstrels, 60 blackface entertainers. It was incredibly popular. This is Burt Williams. The song publisher Ed Marks said about him, "No Negro comedian ever reached his heights. No white performer ever surpassed him. Yet he was still dogged by racism." And this is, I want you to hear.
And life seems full of clouds and rain, and I am full of nothing and pain. Who soothes my thumping brain? When winter comes, no one sleeps, and me with hunger and cold feet. Who says yes when if I send for it, get some meat? No, but I never done nothing no more. I never done nothing no more. This whole time, till I get something from somebody sometime. But I'll never do nothing Como Bobby,
So this is Bert Williams. Of course, this is Al Jolson coming up. It's another quote from Travesty's book. Minstrelry's cultural legacy makes the form extremely problematic for the vaudeville fan. On the one hand, its racial depictions are uniformly heinous. At its very best, it is merely patronizing. But on the other hand, minstrelly's songs, sketches, monologues, and overall format laid the foundation for the character of American show business for all time. American popular music of every conceivable type, ragtime, jazz, blues, bluegrass, country, owe something to it, as do all American solo, improv, and sketch comedy. Minstrelly is like Hitler's Volkswagen, a very good car invented by and for Nazis. So Minstrelly is responsible for the two-man comedy routine. That's where it started. And for the vast variety that would become the character of vaudeville and for improvisation. A lot of people did this. Eddie Cantor, Sophie Tucker, and many, many others did it. This is Al Jolson, whose real name is Asa Jolson, the actor, singer known as the world's greatest entertainer. He often performed in blackface. But again, you know, what's really interesting is, yes, he performed in blackface. However, he was a major champion of African-American performers. And he aligned with Black American struggles, and people in the Black community recognized him and knew that he really was extremely supportive and helpful. And so here is.
Sometimes deep and sometimes wet. I know where, sometimes dead. My heart springs, my tangled around. Well, Bernie, I'm a coming. Hurry, I need to wait. I'm coming. I hope it's rough, I'm not late. Bernie, I'd walk a million miles of one of your smiles when I Mary, my little Mary. Sometimes east, sometimes west. I know where, sometimes dead. It's on my Mary I'm talking about. Nobody else's. My little Mary. My heart screams, I tangled around. Well, Bernie.
I'm going to move on because this goes on for a while, and I think I'm going to try to make up some of the time. Okay, so this man is John Jacob Astor. He was the wealthiest person in the US at the time, and he is largely responsible for the beginnings of vaudeville. It was a raunchy beginning, vaguely criminal. Astor was the wealthiest person in the US. His wealth was equivalent to Jeff Bezos today. He bought the Park Theater in 1806 for vaudeville productions, and he had special accommodations for hookers. He had a designated entrance and a section on the third tier balcony so that they can go and set up appointments. That's the grandfather of the man who went down with the Titanic. So this is Tony Pastor on the left and Lillian Russell on the right. So Pastor was known as the father of vaudeville, although he never actually used that word. And what he did was he cleaned it up, and he promoted it as straight, clean variety for the whole family. No smoking, drinking, cussing, or prostitution. And this is, I love this. So he took advantage of the Gilbert and Sullivan craze by offering pirated productions, if you'll excuse the pun, at cheaper prices. So instead of the Pirates of Penzance, he performed or produced the Pirates of Penyon. And it was only a quarter admission as opposed to the $1 that it would cost somewhere else. And when he was doing that, Pirates of Peñon, he ran into Helen Leonard, a classically trained singer, who he turned into Lillian Russell, who became the most famous woman in the world. And this is what he said. He promoted her as the beautiful English ballad singer I have imported at great trouble and expense. She was from Iowa. One of Tony Pastor's discoveries was a guy by the name of Gus Edwards. And Gus Edwards started a children's academy training program. Who were some of the kids that were in his class? Groucho Marx, Eddie Cantor, Georgie Jessel, Jackie Gleason, Walter Winchell, Phil Silvers, and Sally Rand.
Jeez.
I know. It's like,
Oh, wow.
it's pretty amazing. Okay, these gentlemen. This is Keith and Albee, Benjamin Keith and Edward Franklin Albee. That is Edward Albee's grandfather on the right. And what they did was they started using the word vaudeville, and they really created the business infrastructure. They grew an empire that eventually employed thousands of people. They established this infrastructure and the vaudeville circuit that took people traveling all over the country. By 1900, there were 2,000 vaudeville theaters in America. That's half of all the theaters that existed. That's one of them. And when I grew up in Queens, in New York, one of the theaters actually where we had my high school graduation was the RKO Keith's. And that's all part of that. It's a remnant of that circuit. So the next is really funny. These guys, this is Joe Weber on the left and Lou Fields on the right. And Lou Fields was Moses Schoenfeld. This is in the 1880s. Weber was the brother of Minnie Marx, who was the Marx brothers' mother. They are two Polish Jewish kids from the Lower East Side, and they basically were the progenitors of the Three Stooges physical comedy. They created a thing they called a Dutch act, which is really mocking Germans, but it's called a Dutch act. And it inspired the Ziegfeld Follies. In the 4th grade, they were both expelled from school for disruptive behavior. They worked at odd jobs when they got thrown out of school. They worked at odd jobs to save money to buy theater tickets.
They were 9.
The first act that they put on, they were 10 years old. And then they worked up this Mike and Meyer routine, which I'm going to actually perform, one of them. In 1889, they began producing and touring their own shows nationwide. They went on Broadway. They eventually bought a theater, Weber and Fields Music Hall. In 1896, they made comedy shorts for Max Sennett, and the last performance was the very first performance at Radio City Music Hall in 1932. So this is one of their bits. So imagine we're talking the 1880s here. So Mike starts and then Meyer, answers. I am delighted to meet you. Your disgust is all mine. I received a letter from mine Goyle, but I don't know how to written in her back. Written in her back? Such an edmunication you got. Written in her back? You mean rotten in her back. How can you answer her? Then you don't know how to write. That makes no never mind. She don't know how to read. If you love her, why don't you send her some poultry? She don't need no poultry. Her father's a butcher. No, I mean love words like Romeo and Juliet talks. If you love you like I love me, no knife can cut us together. I don't like that. Well, what do you want to say to her? I don't want you to know what I'm saying to her. All I want you to do is tell me what to put in the letter. Such a foolishness you are. If I don't tell you what to say, how will you know what to write if she don't know how to read? I don't want nobody to know what I'm writing to her. You don't want nobody to know what you're writing her? No. Then send her a postal card. Send her a postal card. If I do, she'll think I don't care 2 cents for her. The postal stands for 2 cents, remember? Okay. Are you going to marry her? In 2 days, I will be a murdered man. A what? I mean a married man. Joke started a long time ago, as you can see. I hope you'll always look back upon the present moment as the happiest moment of your life. But I ain't married yet. I know. And furthermore, upon this suspicious occasion, I also wish to express to you, charges collect, my uppermost depreciation of the dishonor you have informed upon me in making me your bridesmaid. The insult is all mine. As you stand before me now, so young, so innocent, so obnoxious, there's only one word that can express my pleasure, my dissatisfaction. Yes, yes, and I can't think of that word. I know I will be happy. I know you will be. And he shakes Mike's hand, feelingly. And later on, when you lose all your money, when your wife goes back on you and your house burns down and your children get run over, then your best friend will take you by the hand. Then Mike is wiping a tear away. Say, yes, yes. And say, yes, yes, I told you so. Hey, what is this going to be, a wedding or a funeral? A wedding, of course. And remember that also that while I wish you plenty of mishaps, I also wish you lots of misfortune. That's Weber and Field. So they're playing, these are, immigrants who are playing with learning the English language and who are hilarious. I mean, they're really very funny. All right. The next is Gallagher and Sheen. My parents loved Gallagher and Sheen. And when I would come home from school, I would also catch them doing Gallagher and Sheen routines in the living room. I had a strange upbringing is all I can say. So this is, I'm just gonna play a minute of this here, but this is them.
There are two funny men, the best I've ever seen. One is Mr. Gallagher. The other is Mr. Sheen. When these two cronies meet, it surely is a treat. The things they say, on the things they do, and the funny way they greet. Oh, Mr. Gallagher. Oh, Mr. Gallagher. Hello, what's on your mind this morning, Mr. Sheen? Everybody's making fun of the way this country's run. All the papers say these two Europeans. Why, Mr. Sheen? Why, Mr. Sheen? On the day they took away our old canteen. Cost of living went so high that it's cheaper now to die. Absolutely, Mr. Gallagher. Absolutely, Mr. Sheen. Oh, Mr.
So here is a Gallagher and Sheen routine. Oh, Mr. Gallagher. Oh, Mr. Gallagher. Once I think I saw you save a lady's life in a rowboat out to sea. You were a hero then to me. And I thought perhaps you've made this girl your wife. Oh, Mr. Sheen. Oh, Mr. Sheen. As she sunk, I dove down like a submarine, dragged her up upon the shore. Now she's mine forevermore. Who, the lady, Mr. Gallagher? No, the rowboat, Mr. Sheen. I mean, corniness is like built in. It just is. Then Houdini, who was Eric Weiss. I mean, just another one of the many, many performers, not just the magic acts that he did, but a whole spiritualism thing that he was trying to disprove. Then we have here, if you know who these people are, please shout it out. This one you may not. This is the four Cohans.
I thought so. Okay.
George M. Cohan, Josie, Jerry, and Nellie. And they had an act, a vaudeville act for many, many years. Even though their name is Cohan, they're Irish Catholic. And then, of course, the remarkable Marx Brothers. So an example, I really love this, an example of hiding Jewishness, which was a theme for a major part of Jewish vaudeville. This is from Animal Crackers in 1930. In one scene, Roscoe Chandler, the villain of the film, is recognized by Chico, who tries to place him, though Chandler huffily claims never to have seen him before. Chico and Harpo finally hit on it. He's Abe, the fish peddler from the old country. That is, he's Jewish. Abe confesses, using a turn of Jewish voice, I was Abe, the fish peddler. Chico then asks him how he got to be Roscoe Chandler, to which Chandler says, how did you get to be Italian? There's also a line, this has nothing to do with anything. There's a great Groucho line from Horse Feathers in 1932 where he says, whatever it is, I'm against it.
Yeah.
How did that get in there? He visits every once in a while. And so,
They were wonderful.
right, so for people who don't know, everybody,
George and Gracie.
right, it's George Burns and Gracie Allen.
Oh.
And this,
Uncle Milty.
Uncle Milty. So I just came across this, which I did not know before. Peaceful, wonderful Uncle Milty. And lest we think that all was like liberal and progressive and wonderful in the vaudeville world, Burl was watching Frank Fay, who was a very famous vaudeville star, and he was watching him from the wings, which some people don't like. And he heard Frank Fay say, "Get that little Jew bastard out of the wings." And then to make it worse, he referred to him as that little kike. Uncle Milty grabbed the stage brace and busted his nose open. This is kindly Uncle Milty. Another like anti-Semitic story from that period is Ed Wynn, whose real name is Isaiah Edwin Leopold. He had bouts with anti-Semitism because of the woman that he was eventually going to marry. And it only slowed when he named his son Keenan Wynn, after his anti-Semitic father-in-law.
Whoa.
I know. So I never thought of the Wizard of Oz as having anything to do with vaudeville, but I was definitely wrong. It turns out that every actor, except for the Wicked Witch of the West and Auntie M, everyone was in vaudeville. Even the producer and the screenwriters, Harold Allen, co-write the songs, and he was in a vaudeville jazz band. All contemporary comedy has its roots in vaudeville, and this is like a classic example. There were vaudeville performances well into the 30s and 40s. This was government sponsored during the WPA.
Oh,
Yeah, aren't these guys are just amazing. So that's Eddie Cantor, Israel Iskowitz. He was the first openly Jewish male entertainer to mainstream. The first entertainer of either gender to do it was Fanny Brice. And I'll show you some stuff later. Cantor turned Sammy Davis Jr. onto Judaism. He was orphaned at the age of 2 and raised by his grandmother on the Lower East Side in New York. He wore rags, had little to eat, lived in a very shabby basement apartment. When his grandmother enrolled him at school as Israel Kantrowitz, which was her last name, the school shortened it to Cantor. At age 13, he changed his first name to Eddie to impress a girl. In 1909, he became a singer at a saloon in Coney Island. Who was the piano player? 16-year-old Jimmy Durante.
jeez.
Yeah, and
Unbelievable.
my grandfather knew, actually. And do we know who this is?
Three Stooges.
Yeah. We got
Stooges.
Larry Fine, Moses, and Harry Horowitz, Curly Howard. So we have the Three Stooges. I mean, all these guys all worked in vaudeville.
Oh, Jerry.
Right, so Jerry Lewis, whose real name is Jerome Levitch. His father was a vaudeville entertainer. His mother was a piano player on the radio. And both of them encouraged the son to a life as a cut-up on stage. By age 5, he was performing in Catskill resorts with his parents. Soupy Sales, I don't know whatever happened to Soupy Sales. He kind of dropped off the scene, but his name is Milton Suppman. He was born in Franklinton, North Carolina. His father, a Jewish dry good merchant, had emigrated from Hungary in 1894. His was the only Jewish family in town. And Soupy Sales joked that the local KKK members bought the sheets that they used for their robes from his father's store.
Oh, shit.
He was not on the vaudeville circuit, but very deeply influenced by it, as you can see from that picture. Okay. Now let's talk about Yiddish theater. Anybody know who the Statue of Liberty is on the left? It's Golda Meir.
No.
Oh.
Yep, it's Golda Meir.
No.
Yes, the future prime minister of Israel. And this is part of and she's from Milwaukee. And this is part of the Kol Hasidim pageant in 1919. And that's her again. That's her in the back, Golda Meir holding the menorah. It's kind of astonishing.
Unbelievable.
Oh my heavens.
So I'm telling you, when you start doing research in about anything, you just get totally carried away. It's like, oh, look at this. Oh, look at this. Look at this. I can't believe this connection. This is amazing. Okay, that on the far left is my grandfather. The woman holding the mock sword is my grandmother.
Oh, I love this.
Her sister she's standing on her sister's head over there underneath her. And they got the first prize in the Russian program, Masquerade. And they spelled tableau wrong, probably because they're used to talking tablox, talking about locks. So that's why it's now tablox. So this is in 1907. It's really, really amazing piece.
Terrific.
We just have this crumbling remnant, of it. But what these things were, which when I was asking my parents about this, like, why? Well, hello, what is this? So they did these things called tableaux, where they would get in costumes, they would build, little sets. Actually, my grandmother still had a plaster of Paris head of the Tsar in her basement when she passed away, which unfortunately my uncle threw away because I would keep it,
Oh, yes,
Definitely.
Anyway, so they would do these sets. It was behind a curtain, and they would set this up, and the audience would be out there. Then the curtain would open, and they would just be frozen like that, just like this. And everybody would applaud. And then they'd pull the curtain, then they'd rip down the set, and they put up another one. And that was a blow. And that actually was the start of Yiddish theater. And
It's hysterical.
so Yiddish theater started in Europe in 1876 with melodramas and farces and pageants and operettas. It was very popular in Russia, Poland, and then Russia banned it in 1883, God knows why, and it pushed the form to Western Europe and then eventually to the US. I came across Oscar Keller, who I have no idea if that's a relative or not, but in 1927, he ran a Jewish political cabaret in Vienna. It was aggressive satires about the Jewish community using the weapon of wit, as a counterattack. It was geared towards a Jewish audience. Between 1890 and 1940, there were over 200 Yiddish theaters or touring Yiddish theater troupes in the US. And that theater that you see there is the Grand Theater in New York in 1903. It was New York's first purpose-built Yiddish theater. And Jacob Adler, who in this one is performing in the Broken Hearts, he had a tour de force performance that was reviewed in the Times and that made a tremendous impression. Performance as Shylock in a 1903 production of The Merchant of Venice. And then what really had things take off was Jacob Gordon, who created the Jewish King Lear in 1892, and is generally seen as ushering in the first great era of Yiddish theater, where serious drama took precedence over the more operatic kind of things. They also performed at the same time the Dybbuk, also the Golem, plays by Sholem Aleichem. There was a lot going on. Then we have Molly Picon, who became incredibly famous. And here is an example. She's really the first Jewish performer to not hide her Jewishness. Okay. Then we have Boris Tomaszewski.
Ah,
Right? Tomaszewski was largely responsible for the first performance when he was 16 years old of any kind of Yiddish theater in New York City. And he grew to become probably the major star of the Yiddish theater. And he also is credited with starting a lot of the Borscht Belt performances. So
Figures.
Before the Broadway musical set up home near Times Square in the early 20th century, it was a lively theatre that thrived downtown on the Lower East Side, where Yiddishkeit, meaning all things Jewish, took center stage. There, Russian immigrants like Boris Tomaszewski and his wife Bessie pioneered a novel form of musical theatre, which spoke to the multitude of newcomers fresh off the boat, the Yiddish theatre.
There is a huge connection between Broadway and the American British theater. People don't get that anymore about how powerful Yiddishkeit was in the foundation of Broadway, and that the direction of Yiddishkeit was twofold. It was to amuse, but it was also to instruct, and that the theater could be used ultimately as a medium for showing people on stage how certain situations in life.
oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Hold on, sorry.
Which took center stage. Form of music, multitude of new,
Sorry.
the Yiddish theatre.
There is a huge connection between Broadway and the American British theater. People don't get that anymore about how powerful Yiddishkeit was in the foundation of Broadway, and that the direction of Yiddishkeit was twofold. It was to amuse, but it was also to instruct, and that the theater could be used ultimately as a medium for showing people on stage how certain situations in life might play out, and hopefully offering them the opportunity to learn from the examples that they saw on stage.
I was a protege of the great Boris Tomaszewski. Yes, he taught me everything I know. I'll never forget. He turned to me on his deathbed and said, Maximum, alle Menschen moeten machen. People to the ganzen Gassen müssen beklagen.
What does that mean?
Who knows? I don't speak Yiddish. Strangely enough, neither did he.
The Jewish Yankee Doodle, it's a comedy based by Boris Tomaszewski. May Simon. There were just a tremendous number of people who really, got incredibly well known and had a very vibrant culture. That is the Yiddish playbill for the film The Jazz Singer. And that's Jolson in the top left. And if you can read the Yiddish down there, it's the Jazz Singer. Any of you read the Yiddish there on the bottom, the Hebrew?
No. Mm-mm.
It says Meshuggah,
Of course.
which they're translating as the lunatic. And this is pretty silly. I have
Oh.
no idea.
I
This is-
love it.
I know, isn't that an amazing photo? Lenora Menorah. I have no idea who Lenora Menorah is, but that's Lenora Menorah. Okay, so
It's terrific.
I mean, Jews, it's pretty funny. Jews came to vaudeville late, but then became the largest ethnic group performing it, and Yiddish became part of the language. On 2nd Avenue in the Jewish Rialto, in a house and street theater, audiences could go see a Yiddish language vaudeville show featuring the prophet Elijah, Hilda the Swedish handcuff queen, jugglers, one-act plays, songs, dances, and klezmer music, all in the same bill. I would go to that. That sounds good. Sounds good to me. All right, but not all was fun and games. Look at that. We talked about
Oh,
blackface.
that's terrible.
There was a thing called Jewface. And this was, now this was a comedy album that was made, I think, in the 50s, but Jewface was a serious thing. And for example, look at that. This is the real thing. A Hebrew, that's all. Look at his face, typical of his time. And so in Chicago in 1913, there was a play put on that featured a stage Jew in Jewface. This so outraged the theater critic of the paper at the time that he wrote an editorial condemning that kind of behavior and kind of yelling at the Jewish community for allowing this to go on. And so what happened was in 1913 in Chicago was formed the Anti-Stage Jew Ridicule Committee. And I'm still doing some research to find out what that was, but it effectively banned Jewface from Chicago,
Okay.
which is a good thing.
Alan,
Yes.
ADL may have some material.
Actually, one of the, I'm part of this vaudeville group on Facebook, and somebody made that comment as well as the forward, because the forward had, I think, a Chicago office, and they were wondering whether or not, you know, in that material was saved. So I should check it. If it's here, it's probably at Chicago History Society. So I'll have to take a look. But I really, I mean, I came across this in some academic paper, and it's like, what? You know, it was like almost like a footnote. Say, this is rather important. Anyway, so now we have Nora Bayes, whose name is Lenora Goldberg. She ran away from Orthodox Jewish parents and adopted the name Nora Bayes, and she became the greatest single woman singing comedian in the world, and one of the last ones to bury her Jewish identity. And this is one of the things she got famous for. Oops.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the fun, on the fun. Hear them calling you and me. Everyone for liberty. Hurry right away, motivate someday. Make your daddy glad to the ass of the lad. Tell your sweetheart not to time. Be proud of boys in line. Over there. Send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drums coming everywhere. Oh, prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
And that was written by George M. Cohan. Yiddle on your fiddle, play some ragtime with music by Irving Berlin.
You don't mind.
This is Fanny Bryce. And Fanny Bryce, whose real name is Fanny Barak, and she was Funny Girl in the movie that Barbara Streisand was portraying her, Funny Girl.
Father has not been there. She went back in hand. Everything was so big. Oh, baby girl. Broken on apartment. Came somebody's door. Even things I'm wearing. Not was more before. It's so constant that I feel of you. I never get a thing that makes me you. I'm wearing second hand, taking them Salon. So that's why they call me second hand road. Even a piano in the morning. Father fought for 10 cents on the dollar. Second hand coils, I said it's second hand coils. I never get a single thing that's new. Even Jamie Cohen, he's the man I adore. Had the noise to tell me he's been married before. know that I just let him.
Wonderful.
It's pretty
You
great.
know, this is Jack. It's also interesting to compare her version of this with Streisand in the movie.
With Barbara's, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's clearly more heavily accented with the American Yiddish whatever accent than what Streisand attempted to do in the movie. And Bryce, of course, was a great singer. She actually, remember in those days, they had no microphones in theaters, and she was projecting out into the largest spaces. So she was actually a very fine vocalist, but the style is clearly different. And by the way, I don't think it was necessarily improved, but I'm just saying, I think that it's very instructive because we've got a modern Jewish American singer doing it on a movie, and then you've got the original woman. Yeah. Anyway, I'll shut up.
No, don't. This is great. So it wasn't just in New York. It was all over the place, in Pennsylvania, a bunch of other places. You know, Kol Nidre, a dramatic Jewish talking picture with English titles. The Jolly Matchmaker. And then God knows what this is. A stupid Yiddish version of a stupid English song. Oh. I mean, again, this is a contemporary, well, it's maybe 20 years old or something, but this was apparently a real thing, this Yippie Idia. And then we have Menashe Stolnick, who also is a well-known actor and comedian and singer. And who's that on the far right?
Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
Oh, Frank Sinatra.
Yep. So Frank Sinatra outside with Menashe Stolnick, looking at the, at the playbills outside, at the poster outside. And I'll just play a little bit of this because it's so weird.
Ich bin McKinney gewesen, aber schmucklig watschen wie ein Rest mit Appetit. Ich bin Galizia, regular Scotchman. I am the Scotchman from Orchard Street. Lura, lura, lura.
The Scotchman from Orchard Street.
Mein Vater met Salman, mijn zeden met kusje, mijn dingen met velen, mijn onkel met veel. Wil je hessen hem, hoe is machtiges kusje? I am the Scotchman from Orchard.
Can't understand it. No, this is quite a photograph.
Isn't that?
Oh, that's terrific.
And we know who this is?
Sophie Tucker.
Yep. Sophie Tucker,
Okay. Yeah.
whose real name is Sophie Kalish. And I have to say, this one does get to me every time. Every time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is quite a song.
Some things I should be thankful for. I've had a position. And as I sit in the comfort of a cozy chair, my fancy takes me to a humble east side tenement. 3 flights in the rear to where my childhood days were spent. Wasn't much like paradise, but amid the dirt and all, there sat the sweetest dame too, one that I fondly call my Egyptian mama. I need her more than ever now. My Egyptian mama. I'd love to kiss that wrinkled brow. I long to hold her hands once more, as in days gone by, and ask her to forgive me for things I did that made her cry.
Judy Garland.
It is Judy Garland, yeah.
For her pleasure, she never cared for fashion style. Her jewels and treasure, she found them in her baby's smile. Oh, I know that I owe what I am today to that dear little lady, so old and gray, to that wonderful Egyptian mama,
Wow.
Yeah. It's like,
Wow.
wow. It's just amazing. Okay, so this is Smith and Dale, and this is this wacky routine of, like, you know, he's the doctor, and have you had this pain before? Yes. Well, I have it again. You know, that's it. But, so the great thing about these guys, they were very, very popular. So their real names are Joe Sulzer and Charlie Marks. And they met as boys when their bicycles collided on the Lower East Side. And the argument that they had between the two of them was so hysterical, and it attracted a crowd. And they were just, everyone was in hysterics. And so the two boys just said, well, what the hell, you know, let's try to make this into an act. So they went to go and get business cards. They had no money. And so they found a stationery guy who, someone named Smith and Dale, had printed up all these business cards and then skipped out. And so he had these already printed Smith and Dale cards, and he gave it to the boys at a discount, and they became Smith and Dale. It's just really a riot. And Neil Simon based the play The Sunshine Boys on them and on their story.
Oh, great story. Just great.
And they, you know, and they, for their whole lives, they were like, you know, bickering back and forth with each other. And then when they died, they are buried together.
Oh, wait.
And if you look on the left there, Joe Smith.
Book solid.
Book solid. It's just great. Which now brings us to my grandfather.
Oh,
All right. So on the left, you see a program from the War Hospital in Staten Island in 1919. And what's really interesting is that he is the last act, which they usually reserve for the headliner. So I don't know what this was all about. I know that number 3, Eddie Clark, was another one of his partners at one point. And this is my grandfather. And he had this business card, in a repertoire of songs, parodies, stories, and recitations, as good as the best, funnier than the rest. And I love the line, "A well-told story is as welcome as a sunbeam in a sick room." He also has this little thing here where it says he's a Lou Teller delegate of the Buttonhole Makers Union. And so part of this vaudeville group, I had posted this picture because it also says stories of Morris and Abe. And I'm just like, what are stories of Morris and Abe? And so I got a bunch of very, very interesting leads to follow about Morris and Abe, which apparently was a satire, a takeoff on a Broadway show at the time that was Morris and Abe. So I have to follow up on all this stuff. But someone else, in seeing the Buttonhole Makers Union thing, repeated this joke that he had heard. "I work in the open spaces of the West." "Oh, are you a cowboy?" "No, a buttonhole maker." The best. Anyway, this is another one of him. I believe that he bought this act from a guy named Clifford. And so that's why he was like Lou Clifford instead of Lou Teller. And he kept the L-E-W spelling for a while, and then he went on to something else. But I came across a long time ago a playbill that mentioned the one-act plays of my grandfather. And it's like, what? What one-act plays? And I've never been able to find a script or any information whatsoever. But look at this, in their stranded actor, 200 miles in New York City, we carry our own handcar and tracks. I mean, this is just amazing. Absolutely. We describe in burlesque an up-to-date melodrama, revealing all the thrilling incidents of a hero and villain combined, a laugh from start to finish. There he is again, Lou Teller, the topical tramp talkologist, entertainer to their majesty, the American public. Lou Teller, that funny fellow. So I love
he has patent leather hair and you don't.
Yeah, I think it comes from my mother. So yeah, somewhat different here. I got this from my grandfather. I got this from my mother. So, but you'll notice the general here with candlesticks, as epaulets. So this was hysterically funny until World War I started. And then, and my father tells me that my grandfather told him that the world was a much nicer place before World War I. And after World War I, it all went to hell in a handbasket. But what happened with this was he was mocking the German military. Well, when the war was going on and everyone was taking it so seriously that you couldn't say sauerkraut, you had to have Liberty cabbage instead of sauerkraut, he got booed off the stage. And people would go to butcher shops and buy turkey bladders and fill them with some liquid that I don't even want to know what it was. And they would throw it at performers they didn't like on the stage.
That's disgusting.
So my grandfather kind of got booed off the stage because of his German general routine, which must have been hilarious, except for the being booed off the stage. But the routine itself must have been really funny. So then a second tragedy, which led to a very creative resolution, was my grandfather was on tour in Seattle in 1920. And at which point my father, who was born in 1913, my father had appendicitis, a very serious appendix attack. And back in those days, that could kill you. And my father, had a scar, like all the way across his belly. It was really a huge scar. And so my grandmother, who was kind of a battle axe. My grandmother managed to get hold of my grandfather and said, "You have to come home. He almost died, and you have to be here. I can't do this on my own." And now this was, there are no airplanes. I mean, this is a long time ago. So it took a week, to get back, from Seattle, to New York. And then he never went on the road again.
Oh,
And which is really a shame because he was really making a name for himself. But then again, maybe my dad would have died and then I wouldn't be here to tell the stories. So, who knows? But he concocted this wacko act, which he did, for the rest of his life, as the annoying waiter, and where people would hire him to be this comedy waiter, who would do all sorts of terrible things to the guests. I have no idea why people thought this was funny, but somehow or other they did. So here's, a toast to Teller, the busy feller, the lumbering lad who makes you mad. In waiter's coat, he gets your goat, raises aids with the ladies. He draws a whoop by sipping soup. I mean, it just goes on and on. And it got so well known in New York that Milt Gross, who was a very famous cartoonist, did the thing on my grandfather. That's him lying there. And that's my pop in the corner.
I know.
And
All right, honey, I'm on a Zoom. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
so
Ciao, ciao.
Milt Gross was a cartooning genius. He was championed by Art Spiegelman, who did Mouse, in a book called Raw, and another one by Dan Nadel in a book called Art Out of Time. He wrote and drew what many consider to be the first graphic novel called He Done Her Wrong. And he was a popular comic stripper with hilarious cartoon-style Yiddishisms, an animator and a screenplay writer. And he co-wrote films with Charlie Chaplin. And that's the cartoon of my grandfather. And can you guys read this or shall I read it to you?
We like your reading.
Oh, okay. Are you seeing, let me just ask you this. Are you seeing me this whole time with the other
Yeah.
stuff? Oh,
Yes.
bummer. I didn't want that. I wanted you just to have the screen filled.
No, that's
Yeah, but
fine.
we wanted it.
Okay.
It's cool.
All right. So it says, too bad to be true. This concerns a dinner party at the Habsburg restaurant and a rather peculiar waiter. During cocktails, one guest requested sherry and got 3 martinis. Another noticed that the waiter sipped all 3 before serving. Still another asked for celery, and the waiter presented it in his own 2 hands. At dinner, his winging elbows, his clumsy hands drove the ladies quite insane, and the precarious manner in which he carelessly balanced plates made everyone nervous and jittery. Some gentlemen wanted to throw him out. Others thought him howlingly funny. Others sent scathing notes to the maitre d'hotel. This drunken waiter is a disgrace to your restaurant. And everyone was aware of him, talking about him, baffled by him, even the host and hostess. Finally, someone insisted that it's an act. And it was discovered that the insufferable pest was neither a drunkard nor an idiot, but one of the most famous men about town in New York. Lou Teller, the frivolous waiter. He had been hired for that evening by a frivolous guest, and he can be reached at 1871 Wallace Avenue in the Bronx with a phone number, and he can be counted upon to enliven any dinner or break any ice. And that's what I got.
That's great.
That's brilliant.
Let me get this back on here, and I can now stop the screening, stop the sharing.
One of the interesting things about Tomaszewski, and I'm probably going to get this somewhat wrong, but on one of the hoardings, posters, it was Hamlet with improvements by Boris Tomaszewski.
Yes. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, there was a lot of that.
Yep.
And the Yiddish King Lear is not actually Shakespeare's King Lear. It's a whole reworking of it. I mean, the creativity is just astonishing. It's just so engaging and funny. Anyway, that explains me because as Jerry, who I see is here, as Jerry can say,
what I live with, right?
hey,
Alan has a problem with money because he always thinks that, you can always pull quarters
Right.
his ear. And of course, I'm waiting for these quarters to fall out of his ears, and they never do.
Well, I'm turning in the wrong direction, But anyway, as I had said initially, he just had an amazing influence on my life. He was 8 years old. I was 8 years old when he died. We used to every Sunday go to his house in the Bronx. We were a big family, and he would put on a magic act, every Sunday, and we would. He would be there, he'd do his stuff. Then we would dress, he had a trunk and he would open the trunk and we would dress up in costumes and we'd go in the Bronx, marching around the block,
how much
costumes.
fun.
It was great. I mean, it was really great. My grandmother, if any of you remember the story from the Hadassah Hospital, she was also untethered from reality. And,
Tell him about the name tag and stuff.
well, yeah, she had my grandmother had a name tag that said, "Hello, my name is Anna," which I mentioned this in the Hadassah Hospital story that the name tag, it really wasn't to introduce herself; it was to remind her who she was. She could always glance down, just as, oh right.
We might all get to that stage.
Well, this is certainly possible, but she started out at that stage. So
She was always like that.
yeah.
It's wonderful.
One of the interesting things many years ago, David and I helped underwrite Tilson Thomas's Tomaszewski review or whatever. And after it's over, during it, he refers to the Tomaszewski brigade that helped Israel become Israel. So David goes up to him and says, "Maestro, I was most interested in that and had never heard about it before." The guy turns red and walks off. So I figure, this is interesting. And I went up to him and I said, "Maestro, have we done anything to offend you about the Tomaszewski brigade?" He walks off from me. So I have the research library at Spertus check this out. We were close friends with the Israeli consul general. There was no such thing. And why he needed to dramatize the family. And when I was talking to Henry Fogel, he says, "Oh yeah, he's like that."
So he made it up?
He made it up.
That's really funny.
And unfortunately, he's sick now. I mean,
Yeah.
Tilson Thomas had a brain tumor. Operated on last week.
Oh.
And he had some concerts scheduled with the CSO coming up in November, and those are obviously he won't be conducting those. I don't know who's going to be conducting, or even if they're going to happen. But you started out your talk by saying, quoting someone saying that only Jews are great photographers, or something of this nature. Yeah, it reminded me of what Horowitz said about pianists. He said the only great pianists are either Jewish or homosexual. And in this case, it was both. By the way, I don't actually believe that, but that's his opinion.
Yeah, well, Gary Winogrand, the same thing. It's not true, but it does set the stage for you to understand, why that might, have something to do with the way that we approach it.
I'm trying to find a book for you, Alan, that is the dance of Genghis Khan.
Okay.
And I can't find it. I have one copy, and it's about a Jewish Dybbuk, a nightclub performer who is taken to one of the death camps, and he starts to inhabit the commandant And every once in a while, a whole routine will come out in Yiddish. And it's probably the only book of humor, successful humor. Romain Gary wrote it, that came out of the Holocaust. I can't find the damn thing. As I say, I'm holding on to my treasure and not letting it go. But brilliant, you know, every once in a while when the commandant is entertaining important Nazi officials, he breaks into Yiddish song and dance. Fabulous book.
I will try to find it. So just send me the name of it.
Will do.
Which was Genghis Cohen. I could just do a search on Genghis Cohen. So
What were you gonna say, Mara? Were you gonna say something?
I was just going to say that they have not canceled Michael Tilson Thomas's concerts. They still have on the website to be announced for the conductor. So, but that moment went a long time ago.
But it is amazing.
I wanted to ask you, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that it's just amazing that Michael Tilson Thomas is Boris Tomaszewski's, grandson. So what? It's amazing. So Joseph.
Yeah, I just wanted to, maybe you could explain something that I didn't know there was Yiddish theater beyond the early 20th century Lower East Side Yiddish theater. So it's really interesting to hear that it had this whole European life and popularity before it came here.
Yeah.
But what I understood, the Yiddish theater was really, in New York, was really responsible for really creating the sitcom. And by that the Yiddish theater puts a family room at the center of the stage. And so suddenly you go to the theater and you don't see a palace, you see a sofa and a table and some chairs. And the issue is, my wife wants to go to school. And they make a drama out of it, but the Yiddish theater brought domestic issues of integration to the stage. And they did it by making the living room the locus of it. And that this was really the birth of, Norman Lear was doing the same thing, really. Yes. Is this true? This is what I heard.
I have not heard that, but it makes sense to me. I think it makes perfect sense. Again, this is such a remarkable history. It really is an amazing book. I should put it somewhere, but
no applause,
just throw money. Yeah.
But what I had heard was that there was really a combination of Jews on the Lower East Side. They were all Jewish, but that was it. Other than that, they were from different countries with different languages and different food and different traditions and different. So there was a lot of different cultural customs in the Lower East Side sorting themselves out, which lent themselves to humor, the interactions of them. But that this was where some of these issues, and the issues of being in the new world, you could put them up in front of the people and see them. And it really does make sense if you think about it. That the sitcom is this American form of comedy that had probably some of its best creators were Jewish producers that took the social issues head on. So it's very interesting talking on it.
Merle, what's the name of the operetta theater that we go to?
Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue and I can't tell you exactly.
These are all the light operas that were in Europe before Holocaust. And they were quite something. Most of these performers who were extremely famous got out of Europe by the skin of their teeth and never made it in the New World.
Yeah, these are actually primarily the composers who were Jewish in Germany and Austria. And there's this small operetta company based in Oak Park that has revived a number of these musicals that Barbara and I have been to.
Oh, cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
You feel embraced by something that's a mere fog at this point, memory that is being brought back, beautifully performed the last one we saw, one of the singers is a member of Lyric Opera. So it's not Loving Hands at Home.
What's the name of the company?
I'll get it to you. My mind is not quite there, but I'll send it to you.
Great. Yeah, and next time that if they start doing productions again, maybe we'll have a salon outing.
Oh, we can
That's a
have
good idea.
a field trip.
They actually have done a couple of things on Zoom during the pandemic, but I haven't heard from them in a while. That would be a great idea, Alan.
Yeah, I think it'd really be
I saw
fun.
one of those things on Zoom. It didn't translate.
Yeah.
This is where they were cooking and singing.
Oh.
The last one, I think it was the last one we saw, was something like Flower of the Pacific, and it was set in Hawaii, and it was just the most absurd plot, and the music was all wow, 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 you know, and it was just great fun. It was really fun.
It reminds me.
And that the big song just kind of stayed with you as big as it was.
Alexander?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you knew anything more about Golda Meir's career on the stage.
Well, she became prime minister.
Right.
I know, but how long did it go on for?
World stage.
I think she beat a hasty retreat from the boards. So, well, I know that she was part of that, you know, and I'd seen that photo a long time ago, and it is quite astonishing that that's Golda Meir. Yeah.
In Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee. It's really, really pretty funny.
Alan, there was a family of Yiddish actors, I think were very prominent, the Adler family.
Yes.
Well, some of you may remember this, many, many years ago, so it's got to be over 50, when Fiddler on the Roof was first a road company. The Chicago production starred probably the grandson of the original, Luther Adler.
Uh-huh.
And for various reasons I won't bore you with, I was the +1 of somebody who was invited to see the show and afterward have dinner with Luther Adler.
Ah, nice.
So, the music from Fiddler has always gotten to me, but literally from the overture, I was sobbing. Sobbing. And so after the performance, I tried to collect myself and we went backstage and my mascara was dripping and I mean, I was so embarrassed, and I'm introduced to him and he said to me, "Oh, thank God, you're the audience I've been desperate to have."
Oh,
That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect.
Michael and I did go and see the Yiddish version of Fiddler that was revived in New York. How long ago was that?
Last year,
2 years ago. So they did a Yiddish version of Fiddler on the Roof in New York City, and we went and saw it. It was really quite good.
You should have seen the audience's reaction.
It was fabulous.
It was fabulous. I mean, they were singing along with the words, and it was like a sing-along, a group, a community experience.
They were singing along in Yiddish?
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
And it was just, they had on the sides translations.
Yeah.
So you were able to, for those of us who weren't fluent in Yiddish, we could follow the whole thing in English.
But it's amazing how many. It's amazing how many were singing the Yiddish.
But it was really quite something.
It was fabulous.
There have been a number of Yiddish Gilbert and Sullivan productions. There's the Yiddish, the Yiddish Mikado, and the Pirates of Penzance in Yiddish. Yeah, this is, I mean,
the quintessential English.
Yeah, I would
in Yiddish, it's delicious.
Some of that wouldn't translate well, but I would think that the Yiddish transfiguration would be really quite amusing. But I'm obviously because some of the wordplay is really very English.
Yeah, it'd be a little hard to.
I found the name of that group. It's called the Chicago Folks Operetta.
Oh, I have heard of that, actually.
They're very good.
the last email I got from them was last December, so I don't know if they're still around, but anyway, we'll hear from them if they are.
Hey, Alan, I have a question.
But what their mission is to save these incredible productions that they still have scores and I'd be interested if they do produce again.
The interesting thing in the context of today is the people who started this and who are the spearhead of this group are not Jewish.
Right.
Interesting.
But it's the composers of the operettas are all Jewish.
So for those of you who are not Jewish, what did you think of all of this? Right, Shoma.
I loved it. I didn't know what to expect. And first of all, I didn't know all the names that are associated with, like I didn't know Mayer was a last name Jewish, because I just read a book recently and I was going to ask you this. I found the whole thing amazing. It was very funny because the way you present stuff is so charming. It was informative and it was very entertaining, but it was also a very interesting part of American history. And I was reading a book in Mara's place, some book by a last name Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R. So our theater owners, it was a book on theater, the business of owning movie theaters.
Oh.
It was a very funny one. So is there a connection there too? Like they were saying, the book was, I was reading because it was very well written, but I didn't know the connection between the last name Mayer and then all the history told me about vaudeville and the movie business. So is there a connection too, while they were developing vaudeville, maybe they invested in movie theaters? Is that how it went?
Absolutely. And I mean, Mayer was, I don't know if it's the same Mayer, but Mayer was a major figure in Hollywood.
Sure.
I realized that now when I saw that golden Metro Goldwyn Mayer.
Metro Goldwyn Mayer,
one
yeah.
of the pictures you showed in your photo, I'm like, oh, it's the same Mayer probably.
It
It was a
probably
very
is.
funny book, but I didn't make that connection. So that was very cool.
Also, many of the original studio founders in Hollywood were Jewish who had emigrated. They had moved from New York to California because the weather in California allowed them to shoot 12 months
Right.
a year.
Right. Yeah, we used to live in Uptown in Chicago, right around the corner from the old SNA studio.
Oh my.
Which are still there, although it's now not, used much. But it, and that's where Charlie Chaplin made his first, one reel comedies, was here in Chicago. And the block that we lived on, a lot of the actors and actresses in those plays lived on our block. Tom Mix kept his horse in a stable at the end of our block, apparently. So, but then, then it occurred to everybody that, come November, December, January, February, March, not a great time to be filming outdoors. And they moved to California, so which makes a lot of sense.
Right close by, and Gloria Swanson, and I don't remember who else used to jump over the fence of the cemetery and go nookie in the cemetery.
Yeah, Francis X. Bushman. Yeah.
Alan, you might want to ask Diane. I think she told me there's a lot of history of Jewish actresses in Bollywood movies.
Yes.
So when they first started off, there was
Yes.
some, I looked at her incredulously, some movie about Yehudis, which is the Indian term for Jewish people, and
Yeah.
the Wailing Wall. And so typical Bollywood style, they'll have a wailing wall and then mothers break out into song and dance.
Dance.
It sounds too absurd for
You
my
have to sing at the wall.
Yes, that's right. And dance into
That makes sense to me.
There's a wonderful documentary
Yeah.
on Amazon called Shalom Bollywood.
Shalom Bollywood.
Oh, it's fabulous.
Okay, maybe that was
Fabulous.
it.
Yeah.
Really great.
But I think that, the impact of vaudeville, it's just so wide. I mean, it's just affected absolutely everything. It just the speed, the humor, the wit, the work.
I thought you might bring up Judy Garland. I thought you might, she did a thing in blackface, and she was really a vaudeville hooker. And she came out of Broadway, but what you see in these vaudeville performers is just complete, utter confidence.
Yes.
They absolutely are at home on a stage.
Yeah.
They can handle a situation on a stage. They know how to learn quickly. And when the vaudeville performers turned into Hollywood studio performers, there's a big difference in how they perform. And you can see this confidence, this sureness and Judy Garland, the way Judy Garland dances is right out of vaudeville.
Yeah.
What do you mean vaudeville hooker?
You know, she can walk.
Hoofer, not hooker.
Hoofer.
Hoofer.
I heard hooker. I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
No.
sorry.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of, and I learned a lot just coming back to mine. There was a PBS multi-part series called The Jews in America. And they've done a few with similar titles, you know, but they did a wonderful section on the Jewish Yiddish theater in New York. And all of the ones that went into movies like Judy Durante and the creepy guy in Casablanca, all these people that came directly out of Yiddish theater into movies. But it's one of those PBS sets. And they also talked about the Jews that went across with the gold rush into California and would stop and build hotels and bring opera singers to the hotel and buy organs. So you'd be in the middle of Oklahoma and the hotel would have an organ and a singer. So very, very interesting experiences of Jews in the entertainment arts at these early times.
Just as an aside, you were comparing the movie Funny Girl to Fanny Brice in person. And I actually saw Barbara Streisand do the original on Broadway.
Wow.
And it was a different, as I recall, it was a different performance than in the movie because she's such a theater actress. And I thought that the role, as I recall, I mean, obviously this is many years ago, but as I recall, I was impressed that her performance was really an homage to vaudeville as opposed to making it her own, which, as you know, Barbara Streisand is often accused of doing. She was amazing. That was when I think it was her second role on Broadway. It was her first lead on Broadway. And I mean, she just owned the theater. It was in the palm of her hand. And I'm sure that is not different from the way Fanny Brice performed.
Yeah, yeah. I think these were really stellar performers with a huge stage presence, you know, and you know, as Joseph was saying, this confidence, you know, just this confidence that, you know, you're there, you know, you can do anything.
Do you remember that movie Easter Parade? You remember that movie Easter Parade?
Yeah.
Judy Garland's rival was Ann Miller. You're just killing it with this most glamorous hair and those sexiest dances of Fred Astaire. And then Fred Astaire and Judy Garland become the toast of Broadway playing bums. And Judy Garland's a bum and Fred Astaire is a bum. And Ann Miller, like, I can't compete with a bum. You know, the one thing I can't compete with is a bum. And it's so interesting, but that act they did really was kind of right out of vaudeville.
Yeah.
That they did was just two bums trying to make it through the city. But that I thought was really a good example of her vaudeville.
So when I mentioned before this vaudeville group on Facebook, and so I posted one of the pictures of my grandfather in his tramp outfit,
right.
and this guy posts, and it turns out that he already wrote one book. He's working on a revised second version of the book, and he's specializing just on tramp acts. You know, so I just love the fact that there is like an infinite number of things to research and to learn about and get excited about. You know, this guy's been making his life into figuring out who the tramp actors were and what it meant at the time. I mean, that's very cool.
I wonder if there's so much to research. I mean, I'm not Jewish. And as I was raised, I thought of vaudeville as more of a variety show.
Yeah.
And my heritage goes to Luxembourg and France, of course. And it was looked upon as a variety of things. It was not only the humor, it was dancing,
right.
It was singing, it was
magic acts, twirling
magic
plates,
acts, what do they call those?
The jugglers.
The jugglers. And so I never thought of vaudeville as particularly Jewish. I thought of it more as an ethnic folk art, as a medium to give people who weren't necessarily professionals a venue. And so I think that when I found out that many of the performers were Jewish, I'm thinking maybe Jewish people got involved in the art and made it their own because it was one of the few areas where they were accepted, which helped me understand a little bit more about anti-Semitism, which I learned about in my life relatively late because I was not raised in a family that was at all anti-Semitic. And I didn't know what it meant until I came to Chicago, and I was in my early 20s when I first began to really understand what it was all about. So for me, it was it's a completely different perspective. And I think in some ways, vaudeville is much larger than Jewish.
Oh, yes.
It's as a form of entertainment, it is just essential to human nature. And it finds expression in every culture.
Yeah.
And I think the Jewish aspect is one particular part of that.
Yeah, it was a kind of larger influence than one might expect. If all the cultures coming together were equal in their ease at performing or in their ability to make light of situations. And I think that there are some very specific Jewish takes on things that made vaudeville something that was appealing to the performers and then, to the audience. But Yiddish vaudeville was a kind of subcategory of the larger, context of vaudeville. But there were just a lot of Jewish people involved. Yes. But, in the list that people that I was going, it's amazing. Same thing as I said before about the photographers. Obviously, not all the great photographers are Jewish. That's ridiculous. But the percentage is pretty high. And I think it's the same kind of thing here with this, that not all of the vaudeville performers are Jewish, but there's a tremendous high percentage. And I do think it's because it's that sense of stepping back, of looking at things, and of being a little afraid, and kind of, hedging your bets in one sense, learning some kind of a skill that you're absolutely so great at that it's hard to dismiss. I think there were a number of things like that that made it, kind of a home for Jews entering into show business. Yeah. Bye, Joseph.
Bye, Joseph.
Thank you so much.
Alan?
Yes.
When or at what point did burlesque break off from vaudeville?
Yeah, that's a whole, I don't know. That's a whole different area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Shoma, you had a question.
I had a question about the photography, just a connection. You know how you said there were a lot of great Jewish photographers? Yeah. Is it only, could there be an economic reason for that? I'm only asking this because I recently found out a lot of the physicists who ended up in America they were not allowed to study a certain, I don't know which aspect of physics. They were not allowed by the German and the European institutions to study any aspect of this physics except a certain section. Turns out that section ended up being used for things in the Manhattan Project. Like there was a slew of Schrodinger, Einstein, all of them. They weren't allowed to study that aspect of physics in Europe. So they came over to America and they studied it. That eventually helped them with the Manhattan Project and all of that. So do you think there could be a reason besides artistic that made, because photography wasn't cheap, processing film, all of that, right. It takes a hefty amount of investment. Perhaps there's some other reason why there was, as you say, there's a big representation of Jewish people in photography, not just the fact that they're very artistically inclined, but there might be some underlying factor, because it's not a cheap profession.
No, it's not. And I think that's a good point. But, but I think that one of the things is the most well-known Jewish photographers are ones who use small portable cameras. They're not ones using the large format cameras, which may have to do with, why there are so many Jewish violinists, because you could pick up the violin and run.
Run.
And I think it's the same kind of thing, with with these cameras. There aren't that many, Jewish Ansel Adams, who do large format, things. But yeah, the economic aspect of it, you're right. It is not a cheap, hobby. It is not a cheap profession. It's difficult to do.
Yeah, back then you would need a printing place, or because it's film, you need all of that. Not even
Right.
for a small camera. I would be very curious why they all gravitated to a field, and I didn't realize the difference between Ansel Adams, the big shot, the landscape, and
Yeah.
run off with a small camera aspect.
Guys, Michael and I have to go. So that was wonderful
Very
presentation.
interesting.
Very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Learned a lot.
Learned a lot. It was fun. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you, everybody.
That was fun. That was really fun.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time.
Alan, thank you for giving in to my pressure.
Right. I wasn't planning on doing that.
I know that, but you know how much all of us would enjoy it, and it gave important context because Jewish vaudeville was kind of out there, periphery. I'd never learned about it. And when are you scheduled to do another Gilbert and Sullivan?
Oh, who knows?
Okay.
No, it's the two groups that I've been performing with have basically shut down. I mean, not forever,
right.
but they're the one in Evanston has decided to just do some, not a big production, but some small thing where they're bringing in a couple of the principals that they've used before, and it's going to be like an hour program or something. It doesn't seem particularly exciting to me. I'm trying to convince them to do a sing along. I think they'd get right. I think they'd get a much bigger audience if you just did a sing along and not try to. They're trying to write a whole new. A friend of mine is trying to write this whole new play, and it's like, I think you'll feel more.
People need to be connected now, and what a wonderful vehicle
to do
for
that.
connecting people again.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun. So, and then the one in Hyde Park is affiliated with the University of Chicago, and I don't know where they're at with this as well. So,
Alan, this was such a delight. Thank you. Thank
you. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. All right. See you
Love
next time.
you all.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.